Jared Myers, 38, repaired air conditioners across Columbus, Ohio, in a rusted white HVAC van. Most people believed he was exactly what the headlines called him, the man who burned down Franklin's storage and killed a night guard. He drank cheap gas station coffee, wore the same faded work jacket for years, and never raised his voice in public. What they didn't know was that Jared never started the fire. After 1,094 days in prison, he walked into the courtroom and saw Vanessa Hale already waiting for him. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy slow burn stories about betrayal evidence and quiet revenge, subscribe to the channel now. 3 years before the prison gates opened, Jared Myers lived a life so ordinary that most people forgot him 5 minutes after meeting him. He rented a narrow 2-story townhouse in Grove City, 15 minutes south of downtown Columbus. The siding was faded beige. One shutter hung slightly crooked after a winter storm. Jared kept meaning to fix it. He never did. Every weekday began at 5:10 a.m. The coffee maker clicked on first. Then came the sound of boots against laminate flooring and the low hum of local news from the kitchen television. Jared always watched Channel 10 WBNS while checking service calls on his cracked Samsung phone. Buckeye Climate Systems gave him the same routes most weeks. Strip malls, dental offices, suburban homes with dying furnaces, and angry homeowners. He liked the work because machines made sense. People usually didn't. At 38, Jared had broad shoulders from hauling compressors and climbing attic ladders for almost 2 decades. His hands carried old scars from sheet metal and copper tubing. He rarely complained, rarely laughed loudly either. Most customers described him the same way: quiet guy, polite, fast worker. Vanessa Hale used to say that calmness was the reason she married him. Back then, Jared believed her. She was different when they first met in 2017 at a downtown charity fundraiser near Bicentennial Park. Vanessa worked accounting for Franklin Storage and Logistics, a regional warehousing company on the industrial edge of Columbus. She dressed sharply, spoke quickly, and always seemed to know somebody important in the room. Jared almost didn't approach her that night. His work boots still smelled faintly like refrigerant from a late emergency repair in Dublin. Vanessa wore a dark green dress and carried herself like someone who belonged in brighter places than him. But she smiled first. That mattered to Jared more than he admitted. The first 2 years of marriage were simple. Quiet dinners at Rusty Bucket Restaurant. Weekend grocery runs at Kroger. Netflix playing while Jared cleaned HVAC filters at the kitchen table because he hated wasting time. Vanessa used to rest her legs across his lap while scrolling through her phone. Then small things started changing. Not all at once. That was what made it dangerous. At first it was the clothes. New heels in unopened boxes near the closet. Designer handbags Jared knew they couldn't comfortably afford. A cream-colored Burberry coat that appeared in December after Vanessa claimed she'd received a holiday bonus. Then came the second phone. Jared noticed it accidentally one Tuesday night while replacing a capacitor in their garage freezer. Vanessa walked in suddenly and slid something into her purse too quickly. A second later, she smiled. "Work phone," she said casually. Jared nodded. He wanted to believe her badly enough that he never asked again. But after that, patterns began appearing everywhere. Vanessa started volunteering for overnight inventory audits at Franklin's storage, sometimes twice a week. She came home smelling faintly of expensive perfume that Jared had never bought her. When he asked where it came from, she answered too quickly. "Claire from work spilled some on me." Another time, Jared found a hotel receipt in the pocket of Vanessa's coat while doing laundry. Dayton, Ohio. 2 nights. Marriott Courtyard near Interstate 75. Vanessa laughed when he showed her. "You seriously think I'm cheating?" Because of a hotel receipt, Jared didn't answer immediately. Not because he believed her, because he hated conflict. Vanessa understood that about him better than anyone. She knew silence usually meant surrender. Over the next few months, arguments became part of the house, like furniture. Nothing dramatic at first, just sharp little conversations that left marks. You're always exhausted. You never want to go anywhere. "You still drive that ugly van. You don't understand ambition." Jared usually stood in the kitchen while Vanessa talked in circles around him. He kept his hands in his pockets and stared at the counter because eye contact made anger harder to control. One night in March, Vanessa opened a bottle of wine after midnight and sat across from him at the dining table. "I don't think you understand what kind of life I want anymore," she said. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Jared looked at her carefully. "What does that mean?" Vanessa swirled the wine slowly before answering. "It means I'm tired of struggling." Jared glanced around the townhouse. The mortgage was paid on time. The fridge was full. His truck worked. They had savings. Struggling wasn't the word he would have used. But he noticed something else that night. Vanessa never said "we," only "I." After that conversation, Jared started paying closer attention. He saw deleted emails in the trash folder mentioning insurance adjustments tied to Franklin storage. He noticed Vanessa locking her phone screen whenever he entered the room. Once he walked into the garage and heard her whispering angrily before the call disconnected. She smiled immediately afterward. Too immediately. Still, Jared stayed. Because leaving would mean admitting the marriage was already broken. And Jared Myers was the kind of man who kept repairing things long after other people threw them away. By late October, the tension inside the house had become permanent. The air itself felt tight. On the final Thursday before everything collapsed, Jared worked a 12-hour shift repairing rooftop HVAC units outside Easton Town Center. Cold wind tore across the parking structure all afternoon. By the time he returned home, his knees hurt from kneeling on frozen metal. Vanessa wasn't there. A note sat on the counter. Inventory audit. Don't wait up. Jared stared at the handwriting longer than necessary. Then he microwaved leftover chili, watched half a basketball game, and fell asleep on the couch sometime after 11. The phone ringing woke him. 12:17 a.m. Jared reached for the screen blindly. "Vanessa," he answered immediately. At first, all he heard was breathing, then crying, real crying, hard and uneven. "Jared," her voice cracked violently. "The warehouse is burning." Jared was fully awake before the call ended. By the time he grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter, Vanessa had already hung up. No explanation. No details. just crying and fire. Cold rain hit the windshield as Jared sped north on Interstate 71. His old Ford van rattled every time he pushed past 65. The dashboard clock glowed 12:26 a.m. in bold green numbers. Traffic was almost gone, except for semi-trucks and emergency vehicles racing toward the industrial district. Halfway there, Jared saw the smoke, a thick black column rising against the night sky beyond the warehouses east of the freeway. His stomach tightened instantly. Franklin Storage and Logistics sat near Alum Creek Drive, surrounded by chain-link fencing and loading docks. Jared had visited the property dozens of times over the years to repair rooftop HVAC systems. He knew the building layout almost by memory, and he knew how fast fire moved through old commercial insulation. As he turned onto Logistics Parkway, flashing red and blue lights filled the wet pavement ahead. Fire trucks blocked half the road. Police cruisers crowded the entrance gates. Smoke rolled across the parking lot in heavy waves. Part of the roof had already collapsed. Jared parked badly near a curb and jumped out before killing the engine completely. Heat hit his face immediately despite the rain. Firefighters dragged hoses across soaked asphalt while glass exploded somewhere inside the structure. People were shouting over radios. Metal screamed from the heat. Jared scanned the scene desperately until he spotted Vanessa sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance, wrapped in a gray emergency blanket. Her mascara had run down both cheeks. A paramedic held an oxygen mask near her face. Jared moved toward her fast. Vanessa. She looked up sharply when she heard his voice. For 1 second, something strange crossed her face. Not relief, not fear either. Calculation. Then it vanished. She burst into tears and grabbed him tightly around the waist. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I didn't know if you were coming." Jared looked toward the burning building. What happened? Vanessa shook violently against him. I don't know. I was finishing inventory reports. And then the alarm started. Another explosion echoed from inside the warehouse. Sparks burst upward through the smoke. Police officers pushed more people back behind the barricades. Jared noticed several Franklin Storage employees standing together near the loading docks. Most looked terrified. One man was crying openly into his hands. A firefighter walked quickly toward a police lieutenant and spoke quietly. The lieutenant's expression changed immediately. Then he removed his hat. Jared saw it happen from 30 feet away. And somehow, he already knew. A few moments later, a firefighter approached the crowd and confirmed it. Walter Griggs was still inside. Walter worked night security at Franklin Storage 3 nights a week. 62 years old. Former Marine. Slow limp in his left leg from an old construction injury. Jared had shared coffee with him dozens of times during repair calls. Walter liked talking about Ohio State football and old muscle cars. Now firefighters couldn't reach him. The southern section of the building had collapsed too quickly. Jared stared at the flames without blinking. Behind him, Vanessa started crying harder. A Columbus police detective approached carefully with a notepad in hand. "Sir, are you Jared Myers?" Jared nodded once. "I'm Detective Colin Reeves. We just need to ask a few basic questions." Jared glanced at Vanessa instinctively. She kept her eyes lowered beneath the emergency blanket. "Okay," Jared answered. Reeves led him several feet away from the ambulance area. Rainwater dripped from the detective's jacket collar while he flipped through notes. "What time did you arrive tonight?" "Just now." "You weren't here earlier." "No." "Did you have access to the building?" Jared frowned slightly. "For HVAC works sometimes." Why, Reeves looked at him for a long second before speaking again. "Mr. Myers, your employee access card was used to enter the south maintenance door at 11:42 p.m. For a moment, Jared thought he had heard wrong. "That's impossible. Do you still have the card?" Jared reached automatically into his wallet. Empty slot. A cold feeling spread slowly through his chest. He checked again. Nothing. Jared swallowed hard. "I must have left it somewhere." Detective Reeves wrote something down immediately. "When did you last see it?" "I don't know." That answer sounded weak even to Jared. The detective's eyes sharpened slightly. Rain continued hammering the pavement around them. Another officer approached carrying a clear evidence bag. Inside was a dark blue work jacket. Jared recognized it instantly. Buckeye Climate Systems logo stitched above the pocket. Torn cuff on the right sleeve from a ladder accident last winter. His jacket. The officer handed the bag to Reeves. "Found near the rear loading entrance," he said quietly. Reeves looked back at Jared. "Can you explain this?" Jared stared at the evidence bag in disbelief. "I haven't seen that jacket in weeks." The words sounded thin against the chaos around them. Too thin. Behind the barricades, more emergency lights arrived. News vans pulled into nearby parking lots. Cameras were already setting up under portable floodlights. Jared suddenly became aware of how everything looked. The missing access card, the jacket, the dead security guard, Vanessa slowly crying nearby, a detective asking careful questions. It looked bad because someone had designed it to look bad, but Jared still couldn't see the shape of the trap yet. Detective Reeves closed the evidence bag. "Mr. Myers, did you and your wife argue recently?" Jared hesitated. Every married couple argued sometimes. Saying no would sound dishonest. "Yes." "What about personal stuff?" "Did she mention divorce?" Jared looked toward Vanessa again. She was speaking softly with another officer now. Then he noticed something else. She never once looked back at him. "Yes," Jared answered quietly. Reeves wrote more notes. "How did you feel about that?" Jared felt irritation rising now. "What does this have to do with the fire?" "It's just procedure." A second detective joined them, holding a tablet. "Surveillance systems down," she said. "We lost about 23 minutes before suppression systems activated." "Hardware failure?" Reeves asked. She shook her head. "Maybe. IT can't tell yet." Jared listened silently, while rainwater soaked through his sweatshirt. 23 missing minutes. Exactly enough time. His breathing slowed, not from calmness, from instinct. Years of fixing machines had taught him one thing. Systems rarely failed by accident, especially multiple systems at once. Then Vanessa suddenly spoke behind them. Jared turned. She stood beside the ambulance, with tears still running down her face. "He was angry earlier," she whispered shakily. "Before I left home." Everything around Jared seemed to pause. Detective Reeves slowly looked back toward him. Vanessa covered her mouth immediately, like she regretted saying it. But the damage had already landed. Jared stared at her, not understanding. Not yet. Then Detective Reeves asked the question that changed everything. Mr. Myers, why was your key card used to enter Franklin's storage at 11:42 tonight? By sunrise. Jared Myers was no longer just a man standing near a warehouse fire. He was a suspect. The first news segment aired at 5:43 a.m. WBNS channel. 10 showed helicopter footage of Franklin's storage still smoking beneath gray Ohio skies, while reporters repeated details that had not even been confirmed yet. Domestic dispute, possible arson, dead security guard, police investigating husband. Jared watched the television silently from an interrogation room inside the Columbus Police Department. The room smelled like burned coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead without mercy. Detective Colin Reeves sat across from him with a yellow legal pad. Did you threaten your wife recently? No. Did you argue? Yes. How often? I don't know. Normal amount. Reeves leaned back slightly. Normal marriages usually don't end with warehouse fires. Jared looked down at the metal table. He understood how this looked. That was the problem. Every answer he gave sounded weak compared to the evidence already building around him. The missing key card, the work jacket, the argument. And now, Vanessa. At 8:12 a.m., she gave her official statement. Jared watched part of it through the observation window outside the hallway. Vanessa sat wrapped in a dark coat with a paper cup trembling between both hands. Her voice cracked at the right moments. Tears came naturally. Or at least they looked natural. He's been under a lot of pressure lately, she whispered. Financially, emotionally. The detective beside her nodded sympathetically. Vanessa lowered her eyes. He scared me last week. Jared's jaw tightened slightly. That was new. He said if I ever left him... Vanessa paused, swallowing hard. He'd make sure everything burned down around us. The detective stopped writing. Did you believe he meant that literally? Vanessa looked away toward the wall. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Jared felt something cold move through his chest. Not panic, recognition. This was rehearsed. Every pause measured carefully. Every sentence shaped to sound reluctant instead of accusatory. Like she hated saying it. Like she was protecting him, even while exposing him. That detail bothered Jared most. She understood people. She knew exactly how to make them trust her. By noon, detectives searched the townhouse in Grove City. Jared sat handcuffed in the back of a cruiser, while officers carried boxes through the front door. Neighbors gathered quietly along sidewalks, pretending not to stare. One officer eventually emerged, carrying a red gas can from the garage. Jared closed his eyes briefly. He used gasoline for lawn equipment sometimes. Snowblower, generator, nothing unusual, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. A few houses away, someone lifted a phone and started recording video. By evening, Jared's face had already appeared across local social media pages, beside headlines about the fire. People online filled in the missing facts themselves. Jealous husband, control freak, blue-collar rage, another violent man snapping under pressure. The truth moved slower than gossip. It always did. 3 days later, Walter Griggs died officially at Grant Medical Center from smoke inhalation and crush injuries sustained during the collapse. The charges escalated immediately. Aggravated arson, felony murder. Jared sat motionless during arraignment while reporters crowded the hallway outside Franklin County Municipal Court. Vanessa attended wearing black. She cried quietly in the front row while cameras photographed her from every angle. One image spread everywhere online afterward. Vanessa with tears running down her face beneath the courtroom lights. The grieving wife, the survivor. Jared appeared in the background, wearing county jail orange, beside two deputies. Expressionless. People trusted visible emotion. Jared had never been good at performing it. A week later, his court-appointed attorney finally arrived. Martin Keene looked exhausted before he even sat down inside the consultation room at the jail. Cheap suit, loose tie, coffee stains near his sleeve. He carried 3 overstuffed folders beneath one arm. "Okay," Martin said quietly. "I'm going to be honest with you." Jared nodded once. "The state thinks this case is strong. They're wrong. I know that's your position." "No," Jared replied calmly. "It's the truth." Martin sighed softly and opened the folders. "The prosecution has access logs placing you at the warehouse. Your jacket was found behind the building. Your wife claims you threatened her, and now there's financial pressure evidence." "What financial pressure?" Martin slid a document across the table. Past due notice, credit balances. Missed payments Jared had never seen before. His eyes narrowed slowly. "What is this?" Martin studied him carefully. "These came from joint accounts." Jared stared at the paperwork. Vanessa handled most household finances because she worked in accounting. Jared paid bills automatically and trusted her completely. Now he realized several accounts had been drained months earlier. Quietly, strategically. "She never showed me these," Jared muttered. Martin rubbed his forehead tiredly. "The prosecution believes you were drowning financially and angry about your marriage ending." "My marriage wasn't ending." Martin hesitated before answering. Vanessa Hale filed preliminary divorce paperwork 9 days before the fire. For the first time since his arrest, Jared genuinely lost focus. Not visibly, but internally, something shifted. 9 days. Vanessa had already planned an exit, and never told him. Martin kept talking carefully. "There's more." He pulled out printed photographs, security images from a nearby traffic camera, blurry, rain-soaked. But one frame showed a white vehicle near Franklin's storage shortly before midnight. A Ford van, same model Jared drove. "You can't read the plate," Martin admitted, "but prosecutors will argue it's your vehicle." Jared leaned back slowly against the chair. Someone had built this piece by piece. Not rushed, prepared. That realization disturbed him more than the charges themselves. Because preparation meant intention. And intention meant Vanessa didn't panic that night. She executed something. Outside the jail, Vanessa's public image kept growing. Co-workers organized support pages online. A local church held a candlelight vigil for Walter Griggs and invited Vanessa to speak. She stood beneath soft parking lot lights, holding tissues while television crews filmed her, thanking firefighters through tears. "I just want justice," she whispered. People believed her instantly. Meanwhile, Jared lost almost everything in silence. Buckeye Climate Systems terminated his employment after the formal indictment. His union membership disappeared soon afterward. The landlord began eviction proceedings against the townhouse, and Vanessa emptied the remaining joint bank account entirely. Martin visited again 2 weeks later, carrying another problem. The prosecutor's name is Miles Garner. Jared recognized the name immediately. Assistant District Attorney, aggressive reputation. Loved media attention. "He wants a fast trial," Martin said. "Good." Martin stared at him. "You don't understand. Garner thinks you're guilty already." Jared looked calmly through the thick jail glass toward the hallway outside. "That makes 2 of us, then." Martin frowned. "What does that mean?" Jared answered without emotion. "I think somebody wants me guilty." The lawyer studied him quietly for several seconds. "Do you know who Jared thought about Vanessa, sitting in court wearing black, while cameras photographed her tears?" Then he remembered something small. The moment at the Fairson scene when she first saw him. Not relief, not confusion, calculation. No, Jared lied softly. But deep down, he already knew. Near the end of the meeting, Martin closed the folders and exhaled heavily. The state offered a plea deal. Jared remained silent. 12 years, Martin said. You plead guilty to reduce charges, avoid trial, possibility of parole in 7. Jared stared at the scratched metal table between them, then slowly shook his head. I didn't kill Walter Griggs. Martin's expression tightened with frustration. I'm telling you what you're facing if this goes bad. Jared finally looked up. It's already bad. The lawyer had no answer to that. The trial of Jared Myers began 7 months after the fire. By then, most people in Columbus had already decided who he was. The courthouse stood gray and heavy beneath freezing January skies. News vans lined the curb outside Franklin County Courthouse before sunrise. Reporters stamped their boots against the cold while discussing the case beside portable heaters. Inside courtroom 4B, everything smelled like old wood and coffee. Jared entered wearing county jail clothes beneath a wrinkled blazer his attorney had borrowed from a donation closet. The sleeves sat slightly too short above his wrists. His hands looked rough and out of place against the polished defense table. Vanessa sat across the room near the prosecution. Black coat, pearl earrings, soft makeup carefully chosen to make her appear exhausted but composed. She never looked directly at Jared when cameras were present. Miles Garner did. The assistant district attorney walked into court like the verdict already belonged to him. Clean haircut, navy suit, expensive watch. He spoke to reporters confidently. Before proceedings began, careful to sound measured instead of arrogant. This case is about accountability, he told them. Jared watched silently from behind the defense table. Martin Keene leaned closer. Don't react to him. I'm not. I mean it. Garner wants emotion. Don't give him any. Jared nodded once. That part was easy. The prosecution opened aggressively. Garner walked slowly in front of the jury while displaying photographs of the burned warehouse on large courtroom monitors. Blackened steel beams, melted equipment, smoke-stained concrete. Then came Walter Griggs, family photos, military portraits, pictures from the birthdays and fishing trips. Walter smiling beside grandchildren. Garner lowered his voice deliberately. This man died trapped beneath collapsing metal because somebody chose anger over reason. The jury stared toward Jared immediately. Garner let the silence work. Then he pointed directly toward the defense table. The evidence will show that Jared Myers entered Franklin's storage shortly before midnight using his personal access card. The evidence will show he had marital problems, severe financial stress, and growing rage toward his wife. Jared kept his face still. But internally, he noticed something important. Garner never said, allegedly. Not once. The prosecutor spoke like conviction had already happened. Witnesses followed one after another. Fire investigators testified accelerants had been used near the rear loading corridor. Security experts confirmed 23 minutes of surveillance footage disappeared before the fire suppression system activated. Then detectives introduced Jared's missing access card records. 11:42 p.m. South Maintenance Entrance, exactly where the fire started. Martin challenged the evidence where he could, but his cross-examinations lacked force. He looked tired constantly, underprepared, outmatched. The prosecution's strongest weapon arrived on the third day. Vanessa Hale. The courtroom became completely silent when she walked toward the witness stand. She carried tissues in one hand. Jared watched carefully as she took the oath, not because he still loved her. That part had already died somewhere inside county jail. He watched because he wanted to understand how far she was willing to go. Garner approached gently. Mrs. Hale, how long were you married to the defendant? Almost 5 years. Did you love him? Vanessa paused before answering. Yes. Perfect pause. Perfect answer. Garner nodded sympathetically. Can you describe the state of your marriage before the fire? Vanessa lowered her eyes. He changed. Shout. He became angry all the time, quiet at first, then unpredictable. Martin objected immediately. Vague characterization. Sustained, the judge replied. Garner adjusted smoothly. Did the defendant ever threaten you? Vanessa's breathing became shaky. Yes. Jared stared at her without expression. Garner approached more slowly now. Tell the court what he said. Vanessa pressed the tissue against her eyes. He told me if I destroyed his life, he'd destroy mine too. Several jurors shifted visibly. One woman near the back frowned toward Jared immediately. Garner stepped closer to the jury box. Did you believe he meant it? Yes. Why Vanessa? Hesitated again, then delivered the line carefully. Because Jared never yelled when he was serious. Martin objected again. but the damage was already done. The jury was listening to emotion now instead of facts. Vanessa continued describing arguments inside the townhouse. Financial stress. Jared supposedly drinking more. Jared allegedly becoming obsessive about her whereabouts. Some details contained pieces of truth. That made the lies stronger. Then Garner displayed photographs of bruises Vanessa claimed came from prior incidents. Jared's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time all trial. He had never touched her, not once. Martin cross-examined poorly. He questioned timelines, suggested inconsistencies, mentioned lack of medical reports. Vanessa handled every question smoothly. "If I was scared," she said softly, "why would I always call the police? I was embarrassed. I thought I could fix things. Jared almost laughed at the irony. After Vanessa stepped down, Logan Pierce took the stand. Jared recognized him instantly. Franklin Storage loading supervisor, mid-30s, thin beard, nervous posture. Logan refused eye contact while being sworn in. Garner approached confidently. "Mr. Pierce, where were you the night of October 27th? Closing inventory on Dock 3, did you see the defendant?" Logan swallowed hard. "Yes." "Where near the south loading area? What time around? Maybe 11:35. Garner let the answer settle before continuing. "What was he doing?" Logan hesitated just enough to seem honest. He looked angry. "Walking fast. Did he say anything to you?" Logan glanced briefly toward Jared, then away again. "He asked if Vanessa was inside, and then I told him she was still working." Garner nodded slowly. "How did the defendant react?" Logan took a breath. "He said, 'Then she'll learn tonight.'" Martin stood immediately. Objection. Overruled. Jared felt the courtroom shift again. Not dramatically. Just enough. Another inch toward guilty. He stared at Logan carefully. The man couldn't hold eye contact longer than half a second. That mattered. People lied differently depending on experience. Jared had spent years inside customers' homes listening to excuses about broken equipment, unpaid invoices, hidden damage. Logan was terrified, not of Jared, of something else. Martin tried attacking the testimony during cross-examination. "You waited months before reporting this statement. I was scared. You're aware no one else heard this alleged threat." Logan nodded. Martin pressed harder. "You expect the jury to believe you suddenly remembered exact wording after media coverage exploded." Logan shifted uncomfortably. "I know what I heard." Martin looked toward the jury. But the moment lacked force. The prosecution had emotion. The defense had technicalities. That rarely ended well. Closing arguments came 4 days later. Snow fell outside courthouse windows, while Miles Garner delivered the final blow. "Not every killer looks dangerous," he told the jury calmly. "Some hide behind silence. Some hide behind routine. But evidence does not lie." Then he turned directly toward Jared. The defendant believed he could scare his wife into staying. Instead, his anger killed Walter Griggs. Martin's closing argument sounded smaller, rushed. He reminded jurors about missing surveillance footage, lack of direct visual evidence, inconsistencies in witness memory. But even Jared knew it wasn't enough. The jury deliberated less than 6 hours. When they returned, Vanessa sat perfectly still in the front row, gripping tissues between both hands. Jared stood beside Martin as the four-person rose. On the charge of aggravated arson, pause. We find the defendant guilty. Jared closed his eyes once, only once. On the charge of felony murder, another pause. Guilty. Vanessa finally looked at him directly for the first time in weeks. There were tears in her eyes, but no guilt, only relief. Deputies moved toward Jared immediately as the courtroom erupted into noise. Reporters rushed for exits. Walter Griggs' daughter started crying near the back row. Martin touched Jared's arm lightly. "I'm sorry." Jared barely heard him. Cold steel cuffs tightened around his wrists again. As deputies turned him toward the side exit, Jared looked back one final time. Vanessa lowered her eyes instantly, like even she couldn't survive the weight of what she'd done if she looked at him too long. North Central Correctional Complex sat 2 hours north of Columbus, surrounded by fences, concrete, and flat Ohio land that looked dead in winter. Jared Myers arrived there in chains during the second week of February. Snow covered the prison yard in uneven gray patches. Razor wire glistened beneath floodlights as correctional officers processed new inmates through intake one by one, name, number, sentence, everything reduced to paperwork. The guard taking Jared's fingerprints barely looked at him. "Felony murder," he muttered while reading the file. "Warehouse fire." Jared said nothing. By then, silence had become survival. The first thing he noticed about prison was the sound. Metal doors slamming, boots against concrete, distant shouting at 3 a.m. Nothing ever fully stopped. Even sleep felt temporary. His cell measured roughly 6 steps long. Thin mattress, stainless steel sink, reinforced window facing another wall. Jared unpacked state-issued clothing carefully and folded everything with mechanical precision. Routine mattered immediately, because routine was the only thing prison couldn't completely steal. The first month passed slowly. Breakfast at 4:45 a.m. Count checks, laundry rotation, yard time, lockdown, repeat. Jared avoided trouble whenever possible. He exercised quietly, read whatever books were available, kept conversations short. But prison noticed quiet men, especially men convicted of killing someone. One afternoon, in the chow hall, a heavily tattooed inmate sat across from Jared without asking permission. "Warehouse guy, right?" Jared kept eating. The inmate smirked. "Heard you torched somebody over your wife?" "No," Jared answered calmly. The man laughed. "They all say no." Jared looked up slowly. "I didn't do it." Something in his tone changed the atmosphere slightly. Not anger, certainty. The inmate stared another second before shrugging. "Doesn't matter in here." Then he walked away. That sentence stayed with Jared for weeks. Doesn't matter in here, because prison didn't care about innocence. Prison cared about adaptation. And Jared adapted. He learned which guards liked respect and which liked fear. He learned when to speak and when silence carried more value. He learned never to owe favors. At night, though, his mind returned to the fire. Again and again. The missing 23 minutes of footage. The access card. The gas can. Vanessa crying perfectly on command. Jared replayed every memory, carefully like a technician diagnosing a failed machine. Machines always left patterns behind. People did too. 3 months into his sentence, Jared started writing everything down. Every timeline detail, every inconsistency, every conversation he could still remember. He filled cheap prison notebooks with dates, diagrams, and observations using tiny, controlled handwriting. Cell lights shut off at 10 o'clock p.m., but Jared often kept writing beneath the dim hallway glow, slipping through the bars. One night, another inmate noticed, "You studying for law school or something?" Jared looked up from the notebook. No, the older inmate stepped closer. Gray beard, deep lines across his forehead, reading glasses held together with tape. His name was Leon Brooks. Most inmates called him Old Man Brooks. Leon nodded toward the notebook. "You writing timelines?" Jared hesitated. "Yes." Leon studied him quietly. "You're organizing the fire." Jared's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know?" That Leon gave a tired half smile. "Because I spent 15 years investigating insurance fraud before I screwed my own life up." That got Jared's attention immediately. Over the next several weeks, Leon became the closest thing Jared had to a mentor inside prison. Not emotionally, practically. Leon explained how commercial fire investigations worked, how insurance companies tracked accelerants, financial motives, property valuations, and more importantly, how fraud usually looked. "Most arson isn't emotional," Leon said one evening during recreation hour. "Movies lie about that. Real arson is business." Jared listened carefully. Leon continued. Debt, insurance, hidden accounts, partnerships going bad. People burn numbers before they burn buildings. The sentence settled heavily in Jared's mind. People burn numbers before they burn buildings. That night, Jared rewrote the entire case timeline again. Not as a husband anymore, as an investigator. He started noticing things differently. Franklin's storage had been struggling financially for months before the fire. Jared remembered overhearing arguments between supervisors during repair visits. Delayed shipments, staffing cuts, complaints about unpaid invoices. Then there was Henry Calloway, owner of Franklin's Storage, always nervous, always taking phone calls outside, and suddenly very well insured before the fire. Jared sat on the edge of his bunk one evening staring at his notebook while snow drifted outside the narrow prison window. Leon noticed immediately. "You found something. Maybe." What? Jared tapped the pen slowly against paper. The warehouse was worth more burned down than operating. Leon nodded once. "Now You're thinking correctly. Jared looked toward him. But why frame me? Leon shrugged slightly. Because personal rage makes a cleaner story than corporate fraud. That answer disturbed Jared because it felt true instantly. Over the next year, Jared transformed quietly inside prison. Not harder, sharper. He spent hours in the prison library reading legal procedure and forensic reports. He learned how metadata worked, how access logs could be manipulated, how surveillance systems stored backup files. Most inmates lifted weights to survive prison. Jared studied systems, and little by little, he stopped thinking like a victim. During his second winter inside, a corrections officer handed him a plain white envelope during evening mail call. Return address. No name. Just his inmate number written across the front. Jared opened it carefully at the metal desk attached to his bunk. Inside sat photocopied insurance documents, commercial property adjustment forms, claim summaries, payment schedules. His pulse slowed immediately. He recognized Franklin Storage's company name across the header. Leon moved closer quietly. What is it? Jared spread the pages across the desk. The insurance value attached to the warehouse made his eyes narrow instantly. It increased, he said softly. How much? Jared checked again carefully. Then again. Almost 4 times. Leon stared at him. When Jared flipped pages quickly until he found the revision approval date, 17 days before the fire. The cell-block noise around them faded into background static. Jared kept reading. Additional coverage. Emergency loss clauses. Structural replacement adjustments. And near the bottom of one approval form sat a familiar signature, Vanessa Hale. Jared stared at the page for a long time without moving. Not grief, not heartbreak. Something colder. Confirmation. Leon folded his arms beside the bunk. That's not normal, he muttered. No, especially not 17 days before total loss. Jared continued scanning the paperwork carefully. Then another detail surfaced. A consulting authorization linked to Dayton, Ohio. Same city from the hotel receipt Vanessa once laughed about. The same receipt Jared had tried to ignore. He leaned back slowly against the wall. For the first time since sentencing, the case stopped feeling random. Because random mistakes didn't create layered financial protections. Random fires didn't erase exactly 23 minutes of surveillance. And random wives didn't secretly restructure insurance policies weeks before a building burned down. Leon studied Jared carefully across the dim prison cell. What are you gonna do? Jared looked down at the insurance forms again, then toward the growing stack of notebooks beside his bunk. For almost 2 years, prison had slowly buried the old version of him. The man who trusted easily, the man who avoided confrontation, the man who believed silence alone could protect peace. That version no longer existed. Now Jared spoke quietly without looking up. I'm going to prove she planned all of it. Leon nodded once, then pointed toward the paperwork. You better start with whoever sent those. Jared stared again at the envelope. No fingerprints visible. No message attached. Only evidence. And somehow, that frightened him, almost as much as it gave him hope. Jared Myers spent the next 6 weeks studying the insurance documents like blueprints for a machine that had exploded in his face. Every line mattered, every date, every signature. North Central Correctional Complex remained loud and cold around him, but Jared barely noticed anymore. He worked through lunch breaks in the library. He copied numbers into notebooks during count checks. At night, he sat cross-legged on the bunk beneath weak fluorescent light, tracing timelines again and again. The deeper he looked, the stranger Franklin Storage became. The warehouse had increased its fire insurance coverage from $2.1 million to nearly $8.9 million, only 17 days before the fire. That alone bothered him. But the details underneath bothered him more. Additional clauses covered inventory replacement, structural loss, emergency business interruption, and accelerated payout guarantees. Somebody had prepared carefully for catastrophic damage. Leon Brooks studied the photocopies beside him one evening. This kind of increase usually triggers internal review, he muttered. Insurance companies hate sudden jumps. Jared nodded. So why approve it? Leon tapped the page. Depends who pushed it through. Near the bottom sat the authorization signature again. Vanessa Hale. Not Henry Calloway. Not corporate legal staff. Vanessa. Jared leaned back against the concrete wall slowly. She handled accounting. Leon adjusted his taped glasses. She handled more than accounting. That sentence stayed in Jared's head long after lights out. The next breakthrough came from memory instead of paperwork. Dayton. The hotel receipt. For months before the fire, Vanessa claimed she traveled there occasionally for inventory consulting. Jared never questioned it deeply, because he spent most days crawling through attics and repairing compressors across Columbus. But now, every trip looked different, especially after Jared noticed another name buried inside the insurance packet. A consulting firm called Mid-State Risk Solutions, headquartered in Dayton. He copied the name carefully into his notebook. The following Tuesday, Jared used his single monthly legal phone call to contact the only attorney whose name Leon kept repeating. Naomi Bennett, former public defender, known for wrongful conviction appeals. Difficult, expensive, but relentless. She doesn't care if clients are likable, Leon had said earlier that week. She cares whether systems failed. That mattered. Because Jared understood something now. Most people already hated him. He didn't need sympathy anymore. He needed somebody who respected evidence more than appearances. The prison phone connection crackled loudly during the call. A receptionist answered first. Bennett Legal Group. My name is Jared Myers, he said calmly. I was convicted in the Franklin Storage fire case. Silence followed briefly, then keyboard typing. We're not accepting new appeals at this time. I have evidence connected to insurance fraud. Another pause. Then the receptionist lowered her voice slightly. One moment. Jared waited beneath buzzing fluorescent lights while inmates moved around him toward lunch call. Finally, another voice entered the line, sharp, controlled, female. This is Naomi Bennett. Jared straightened. Automatically. I know who you are. That doesn't answer why you're calling me. Direct. No wasted politeness. Good. Jared explained the insurance increase first, then the Dayton consulting connection, then the missing surveillance window. Naomi interrupted several times. Do you have proof? Yes. Original documents. Photocopies. That's weaker. I know. How did you get them? I don't know. That answer created immediate silence again. Finally, Naomi spoke carefully. Mr. Myers, half the prison population claims they were framed. I didn't call for sympathy. Another pause. Then Naomi asked quietly, What do you want? Jared looked through reinforced glass toward falling snow outside the prison yard. I want somebody to look at the case without assuming I'm guilty first. Naomi exhaled slowly. Send me everything you have. The line disconnected seconds later. Leon looked up from the table when Jared returned to the housing unit. How'd it go? Jared sat carefully on the lower bunk. She didn't hang up. Leon grinned faintly. That's basically enthusiasm for Naomi Bennett. 3 weeks passed before Jared heard from her again. During that time, he kept building timelines. Vanessa's overnight inventory audits. The insurance increase. Henry Calloway's growing debt problems. The deleted surveillance window. And something else. The burner phone. Jared remembered seeing a cheap prepaid phone charger inside Vanessa's car months before the fire. At the time, she claimed it belonged to a coworker. Now the memory bothered him constantly, especially because Vanessa always bought things carefully, deliberately. She hated disposable electronics. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, a corrections officer appeared outside Jared's cell. Legal visit. Jared stood immediately. Naomi Bennett waited behind thick glass inside the attorney conference room. Early 40s, dark blazer, hair pulled back tightly. No unnecessary jewelry. She looked more like a federal investigator than a defense attorney. Several thick folders sat beside her, already tabbed with colored notes. That got Jared's attention instantly. Naomi picked up the phone first. You were right about the insurance increase. Jared remained standing another second before sitting. What else? Franklin's storage was drowning financially 6 months before the fire. She opened a folder. Late vendor payments, loan restructuring, commercial debt exposure. Jared listened carefully. Naomi continued. Henry Calloway personally guaranteed several business loans. If the company failed naturally, he lost almost everything. But if it burned, the insurance payout covered the debt. Neither spoke for a moment. Outside the room, another inmate laughed loudly down the hallway while guards shouted for movement. Naomi flipped another page. I also checked mid-state risk solutions. And one consultant visited Franklin's storage repeatedly before the fire, who Naomi slid a photocopy toward the glass. A middle-aged man named Eric Vance. Commercial insurance adjuster. Dayton address? Jared studied the document. What does he have to do with Vanessa? We're still figuring that out. Still, not maybe. That single word mattered. For the first time since sentencing somebody besides Leon, believed the case deserved real investigation. Naomi leaned closer toward the glass. There's another issue. Jared waited. Your trial testimony from Logan Pierce. Jared's jaw tightened slightly. What about it? Naomi opened another file. His financial records changed immediately after the conviction. Jared stared at her. How much? $18,000 deposited across 2 months. Cold silence filled the room. Naomi tapped the paperwork lightly. Cash-heavy transfers. Hard to trace completely. But timing looks terrible. Can you prove Vanessa paid him? Not yet. Naomi watched him carefully. Most attorneys looked for emotional reactions from clients. Fear, hope, rage. Jared gave her none. Only focus. Finally, Naomi asked the question directly. Did you threaten Vanessa number ever hit her? No. You understand lying to me destroys any chance you have. Jared held eye contact steadily. I know. Naomi studied him another few seconds, then nodded once. That small gesture carried more weight than encouragement would have. She believed him, not emotionally, professionally, which meant more. Before leaving, Naomi placed one final document against the glass, a retail purchase record. Prepaid track phone. Bought 16 days before the fire. Paid with a Visa gift card. Location, Dayton, Ohio. Jared stared at the receipt carefully. What does this mean? Naomi crossed her arms. It means somebody involved in this case didn't want calls traced. Vanessa. Maybe. Jared looked again at the purchase timestamp. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Vanessa sitting in her car outside the townhouse one evening after returning from Dayton, talking softly before hiding a phone beneath the seat when Jared approached. At the time, he ignored it. Now every ignored detail felt poisonous. Naomi gathered her folders carefully. I'm filing requests for additional discovery. You think they'll cooperate? No, she answered honestly. Then why do it? Because people who hide evidence usually panic when someone starts pulling at the right threads. The guard signaled visitation time ending. Naomi stood. One more thing. Jared looked up. The prosecutor on your case, Miles Garner? Yes. He rejected 2 separate recommendations for deeper financial investigation before trial. Jared frowned slightly, while Naomi slid the folders beneath one arm. That, she said quietly, is exactly what I intend to find out. Naomi Bennett hated coincidences. That was the first thing Jared learned about her during the second year of his sentence. Every time a fact seemed too convenient, Naomi dug deeper instead of moving on. And the deeper she dug into Franklin's storage, the more the original case against Jared started looking engineered instead of discovered. The surveillance footage bothered her most. 23 missing minutes. Too precise. Too clean. Most damaged security systems failed messily. Corrupted files, partial skips, random distortion. But Franklin's storage lost exactly the section investigators needed most. Naomi visited the warehouse property herself on a cold March morning after finally obtaining access through post-conviction review requests. The fire damage had mostly been cleared by then. Only blackened concrete pads and twisted steel remained behind temporary fencing. Wind pushed loose ash across the empty industrial lot. A private demolition crew worked nearby. Naomi stood near the southern loading area, studying building angles while holding printed site maps beneath one arm. Something about the camera layout felt wrong. Franklin Storage's internal system faced inward toward loading docks and inventory lanes. But businesses rarely existed alone. Nearby structures often captured overlapping footage accidentally. That thought kept bothering her until she crossed the street toward an abandoned self-service car wash sitting opposite the warehouse entrance. 3 wash bays, faded blue paint, security cameras mounted under the roofline. Naomi knocked on the office door twice before an older man wearing a Cleveland Browns sweatshirt answered. "You own this place?" she asked. Unfortunately, Naomi showed identification. "I'm reviewing the Franklin Storage fire from 2 years ago." The owner immediately frowned. Thought they already locked somebody up for that. They did. The man studied her expression carefully. "Oh," he muttered. "You think they got the wrong guy." Naomi ignored the comment. "Did your surveillance system record the street back then?" "Yeah, mostly for vandalism." "Do you still have the footage?" The owner laughed once. "Lady, that was years ago." Naomi nodded. "Do you use cloud backup?" The man stopped laughing. A few hours later, Naomi sat inside a cramped office, watching old server archives load painfully slowly across a dusty monitor. Most footage had already been overwritten, but not all of it. The car wash system automatically uploaded compressed backup fragments to a remote storage server every 12 hours. Low quality, incomplete, mostly useless, mostly. Naomi spent 6 straight hours reviewing damaged video files frame by frame. Rain distorted the image quality heavily the night of the fire. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement in blurred streaks. Vehicles appeared like moving shadows. Then at timestamp 11:31 p.m., a dark SUV entered frame near the rear access road behind Franklin Storage. Naomi paused immediately. The footage quality was terrible, but she kept watching. The SUV stopped briefly beside the south maintenance entrance. A figure exited. Female build, medium height. Something red hanging from one shoulder. The person disappeared toward the warehouse. Naomi relayed the clip 5 more times silently. Then called Jared from the prison legal line the next morning. He answered on the 3rd ring. What happened? No greeting. Naomi almost respected that. We found external footage. Silence. Then Jared asked quietly, "How bad depends who you are." Naomi explained the car wash camera slowly, while Jared listened without interrupting once. When she mentioned the red object, his voice changed slightly. A tote bag. What Vanessa had a red Target tote she carried everywhere. Naomi wrote that down instantly. You're sure? Yes. What happened to it after the fire? Long pause. I never saw it again. Naomi leaned back in her office chair. Interesting. Very interesting. Over the next week, she hired a digital forensic analyst named Victor Salinas to recover additional metadata from the damaged video fragments. Victor worked out of Cincinnati and charged obscene amounts of money. But he was also the best. You're asking for miracles, Victor warned. while examining the files. I'm asking for accuracy. That costs more. Naomi slid another check across the desk. Victor smiled faintly. Then let's hunt ghosts. 3 days later, Victor called her at 1:14 a.m. I found manipulation artifacts. Naomi sat upright immediately inside her apartment office. Explain, the Franklin storage footage wasn't just deleted. Victor's keyboard clicked rapidly through speakerphone. Somebody manually altered synchronization logs before deletion occurred. Naomi frowned. What does that mean? It means the surveillance gap was created intentionally, probably by someone with internal access. Naomi stared at the dark apartment window across from her desk. Can you prove that in court? Maybe. Maybe isn't enough, Victor sighed. The metadata shows timestamp irregularities, inconsistent with hardware failure. That's the strongest statement I can make professionally. Good enough for now. The next prison meeting with Jared lasted almost 2 hours. He looked thinner than before, sharper around the eyes. Prison had sanded away softness without making him visibly harder. Naomi spread photographs and reports across the visitation table. The prosecution claimed the surveillance outage was accidental, she said. It wasn't. No. Jared studied the blurred SUV image carefully. You can't see the plate. We don't need the plate yet. Naomi tapped another document. Victor believes somebody altered the camera synchronization system manually before deletion. Jared's eyes narrowed slightly. Inside job, most likely. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Jared asked the question quietly. What if Henry Calloway helped her? Naomi folded her arms. I think Henry knew about the insurance fraud. Knew or participated. That's what I'm trying to prove. Jared leaned back slowly. The old version of him might have sounded emotional then. Angry. Bitter. Instead, he analyzed. If Henry was involved, he said carefully, why let Vanessa control so much? Naomi nodded slightly. Exactly. That bothered her too. Most corporate fraud schemes centralized authority carefully. But Vanessa appeared unusually active in critical financial decisions. Too active for a mid-level accounting employee. Unless she possessed leverage somewhere, or a relationship. Naomi didn't say that part aloud yet. Instead, she slid another photo across the table. The female figure entering the warehouse, red tote visible even through pixel distortion. Jared stared at it for a long moment. Then something shifted subtly in his expression. Not emotion, memory. What? He looked up slowly. The night before the fire. Naomi waited. Vanessa cleaned out her car. What do you mean? She spent almost an hour in the garage moving bags around. Did she say why, Num? Jared looked back at the image again. But she threw away old clothes afterward. Naomi's instincts sharpened instantly. Why does that matter? Jared answered quietly. Because Vanessa never threw anything away. That detail stayed with Naomi long after the meeting ended. Compulsive planners rarely discarded objects randomly after major crimes, unless they were removing traces. 2 weeks later, Naomi formally filed a motion requesting post-conviction evidentiary review based on newly discovered digital evidence. The state resisted immediately. Miles Garner personally submitted opposition paperwork arguing the footage was inconclusive and irrelevant. That interested Naomi more than it should have. Prosecutors usually protected convictions automatically. But Garner's response felt personal, aggressive, almost defensive. Then Victor discovered something else buried inside the recovered metadata logs. An administrative login had accessed the Franklin storage camera server 34 minutes before the fire. Username VHALE_accounting2. Naomi stared at the screen silently. Vanessa Hale. Direct system access. Victor adjusted his glasses beside the monitor. Somebody used her credentials. Naomi nodded slowly. Yes, but that still doesn't prove she personally logged in. No, Naomi agreed. Then she looked back toward the corrupted footage of the woman carrying the red tote bag into the warehouse moments before the fire. But it proves she was much closer to this than the jury ever heard. Later that night, Naomi sat alone in her office, reviewing trial transcripts again. Miles Garner had built the entire case around one central idea. Jared Myers acted emotionally, but the evidence emerging now suggested the opposite. The fire looked calculated, prepared, financially motivated, which meant someone lied professionally enough to redirect an entire murder investigation toward the wrong man. Naomi closed the transcript slowly, then picked up her phone and dialed another number, Logan Pierce, the witness who claimed Jared threatened Vanessa the night of the fire. The call went directly to voicemail. Naomi listened to the automated Kentucky area code recording carefully, then wrote one sentence into her notebook. Find out what Logan Pierce is afraid of. Logan Pierce disappeared almost immediately after Jared's conviction. Not officially. He still existed on paper. Driver's license active. No outstanding warrants. Occasional tax records. Utility bills appearing under different addresses across Kentucky. But people who knew him described the same pattern. Keeps moving. Pays cash. Doesn't stay long. Naomi Bennett drove to Louisville herself after tracking his most recent employment through warehouse payroll records tied to a shipping company near the Ohio River. Rain covered Interstate 71 most of the trip. Gray sky, gray pavement. Semi-trucks spraying dirty water across the lanes. By the time she reached the warehouse district outside Louisville, evening had already settled over the loading docks. Logan Pierce worked nights now. Interesting. People carrying guilt often preferred darkness. Naomi waited inside her rental car near Dock C while workers exited one by one beneath yellow security lights. At 8:17 p.m., Logan finally appeared. Same nervous posture from the trial. Same thin beard. But older now. More tired. He froze immediately when Naomi stepped out holding an umbrella. You remember me? She said calmly. Logan glanced toward the parking lot entrance instinctively. I got nothing to say. Naomi walked beside him, anyway, as he headed toward a rusted Chevy pickup. You testified against Jared Myers. I already talked to investigators. You lied under oath. That stopped him, only for a second. Then he kept walking. You can't prove that. Naomi watched him unlock the truck with slightly shaking hands. Actually shaking. Fear. Not anger. Fear mattered more. She leaned lightly against the driver's side door before he could enter. $18,000, she said quietly. Logan's face drained immediately. Good. We tracked the deposits, Naomi continued, spread across multiple transactions after the trial. I don't know what you're talking about. Cash heavy. Transfers. Poorly hidden. Logan swallowed hard. Rain tapped loudly against the truck hood between them. Naomi lowered her voice slightly. Who paid you? No one. You understand, perjury attached to a murder conviction can destroy the rest of your life, Logan finally snapped. You think I wanted any part of that? His voice came out louder than expected. Several nearby workers glanced over briefly. Naomi stayed calm. Then help me understand. Logan looked away toward the wet parking lot. For a moment, Naomi thought he might actually talk. Instead, he shook his head. You should leave. Did Vanessa Hale pay you? Logan's silence answered faster than words. Naomi stepped closer. What are you afraid of? That question landed hardest. Because Logan immediately stopped breathing normally, not dramatic panic. Recognition. The kind people showed when someone accidentally touched the real wound beneath the lie. She told me it was insurance. He muttered finally. Naomi stayed completely still. What did the fire? There it was. The first crack. Logan rubbed both hands across his face aggressively. She said nobody would get hurt. Vanessa told you that personally? He nodded once. When week before the fire. Naomi's pulse slowed carefully. This mattered. Very much. What exactly did she ask you to do? Logan stared through the rain toward distant loading lights. She said Jared might show up angry that night, but he didn't. No, so you lied. Logan laughed bitterly under his breath. You think I don't know that Naomi studied him carefully? The man looked exhausted, hollowed out, not criminal by nature, weak. Weak people often caused enormous damage because they mistook cowardice for safety. What about the money? Naomi asked. Logan closed his eyes briefly. She said it was appreciation for helping. Who transferred it? I don't know. Try harder. She used cash mostly. Mostly. Logan hesitated again. Then another sentence slipped out quietly. There was another guy. Naomi focused instantly. Who? I don't know his name. What did he look like? Tall. Expensive suits. Gray hair. Henry Calloway. Logan shook his head immediately. No, younger. Naomi's mind moved quickly, through possibilities. Then one name surfaced naturally. Miles Garner, the prosecutor. No, too reckless, too obvious. Still, the description fit disturbingly well. Before she could press further, Logan stepped back toward the truck. I'm done. You're not safe. That froze him again. Naomi continued carefully. Whatever Vanessa promised you is already collapsing. The evidence is moving. When this case reopens, prosecutors will need someone to blame first. Logan's breathing grew uneven. She said Jared wouldn't fight back, he whispered. Naomi said nothing. Because some sentences revealed more than direct confessions ever could. Logan opened the truck door slowly, then paused. If I help you, Naomi waited. They'll bury me too. They. Logan immediately regretted the word. Naomi saw it happen across his face. There's more than Vanessa involved here, isn't there? No answer. But fear deepened visibly in his eyes. That was enough for now. Back in Ohio, Jared sensed momentum changing even before Naomi updated him. She visited prison 3 days later carrying thicker files than before. Jared sat across the visitation table watching her organize documents carefully. Logan cracked, she said. Not emotional, professional. But Jared understood what those words meant. How much enough? Naomi explained the Louisville meeting piece by piece while Jared listened silently. When she repeated Logan's statement about Vanessa promising nobody would get hurt, something hardened quietly behind Jared's eyes. Walter Griggs, the old security guard who never made it home. Until that moment, Jared had spent years focused mainly on surviving his own conviction. Now, another realization settled in fully. Walter died because Vanessa miscalculated. Not because of rage, not because of passion, because of greed. Jared leaned back slowly. She thought she controlled the fire. Yes. She didn't. No. Naomi opened another folder. I'm filing a motion for post-conviction relief based on witness credibility, financial misconduct, and digital evidence. Jared nodded once. You think the court listens? I think they'll have to. But Naomi still looked concerned. Jared noticed immediately. What? She hesitated. Logan is terrified. A Vanessa number? Naomi slid her notebook across the table. Inside sat one sentence circled heavily. Who else benefited? Jared stared at it. Then another thought emerged slowly. Miles Garner. Naomi watched him carefully. You've thought that before. He pushed too hard. That alone proves nothing. No. Jared agreed. But he ignored financial evidence. Naomi crossed her arms. Prosecutors ignore things constantly when they think they already have the right suspect. Jared looked toward the prison window. You don't believe that. Silence stretched several seconds. Finally, Naomi admitted quietly, no, because the deeper she investigated, the less the original prosecution resembled tunnel vision, and the more it resembled steering. Somebody guided the narrative aggressively toward Jared before evidence fully existed. The emotional husband, the angry blue-collar worker, the dangerous quiet man. Easy story, clean story. A jury could understand it instantly. Naomi gathered her files again near the end of visitation. One more thing. Jared looked up. We're requesting a formal evidentiary hearing. When depends how aggressively the state fights. And if they win, Naomi met his eyes directly. Then you stay here. Simple, brutal, honest. Jared respected honesty now more than hope. After she left, he returned slowly to his housing unit, carrying years of tension inside his chest like concrete blocks. Leon Brooks noticed immediately. "You look different." Jared sat carefully on the lower bunk. Things are moving. Good moving or dangerous moving? Jared thought about Logan's fear. The missing money. The manipulated surveillance system. The unnamed man in expensive suits. Then he answered quietly, "I don't think Vanessa built this alone." Leon studied him for a moment, then nodded once, like he had expected that answer already. "Big frauds rarely belong to one person," he said. That night, Jared couldn't sleep. Rain hammered against distant prison windows, while guards conducted midnight counts under harsh fluorescent lights. Somewhere beyond those concrete walls, Naomi Bennett was reopening the case piece by piece. And somewhere else, Vanessa Hale was likely beginning to realize something dangerous. Jared Myers had survived long enough to start fighting back. The evidentiary hearing began on a wet Monday morning in October. 3 years after the fire. 3 years after Jared Myers had been led out of Franklin County Courthouse in handcuffs, while cameras flashed around him like lightning. This time, deputies transported him from North Central Correctional Complex before sunrise in a white prison van with blacked-out rear windows. Rain followed them the entire drive south to Columbus. Jared sat chained beside 2 other inmates during the trip, but his attention stayed fixed on the blurred highway sliding past the glass, gas stations, truck stops, exit signs, normal life continuing without him. When the courthouse finally appeared downtown through gray rain, Jared felt no excitement, only pressure. Because hope inside prison was dangerous. Hope made time slower. Deputies escorted him through a restricted basement entrance beneath Franklin County Courthouse. The same building where his conviction had happened now smelled exactly as he remembered. Old paper, floor polish, coffee. Nothing changed except him. A younger corrections officer glanced at the paperwork while removing Jared's transport restraints. "You're the warehouse case, right?" Jared didn't answer. The officer shrugged, awkwardly. "Heard they might reopen it." Still no answer. Silence unsettled people more than anger usually did. Upstairs, reporters already gotten crowded the hallway outside courtroom 4B. Word about Naomi Bennett's evidence motion had spread quickly through Columbus media during the previous week. Wrongful convictions attracted attention, especially when the original case involved death. Jared entered through the side door wearing prison blues beneath a dark jacket Naomi had arranged for him. His wrists remained cuffed until the final moment before proceedings began. The courtroom noise softened noticeably when people saw him. Not sympathy, recognition. The man from the headlines had returned. Jared scanned the room once carefully. Walter Griggs' daughter sat near the back beside her husband. Older now, tired-looking. Miles Garner stood near the prosecution table, speaking quietly with state attorneys. And then Jared saw Vanessa. She sat 3 rows behind the prosecution, while wearing a cream-colored coat and dark sunglasses despite the rain outside. For a second, neither moved. Then Vanessa slowly removed the glasses. Jared noticed 2 things immediately. She looked thinner, and she looked afraid, not dramatic fear, controlled fear, the kind hidden beneath expensive clothing and careful posture. Naomi Bennett entered moments later carrying 3 thick banker's boxes filled with files. Unlike everyone else in the room, she looked completely calm. She placed the boxes beside the defense table with methodical precision before finally sitting beside Jared. "You sleep?" she asked quietly. "A little." "Good." That was all. No emotional speech. No promises. Judge Harold Bennett entered exactly at 9 a.m. The hearing began immediately. Naomi stood first. "Your Honor, the defense requests post-conviction relief based on newly discovered evidence, prosecutorial oversight, witness credibility failure, and digital forensic analysis unavailable during the original trial." Miles Garner rose almost instantly. "The state maintains the conviction remains legally sound." Naomi didn't even look at him. Good. Jared noticed that immediately. She wasn't performing for the room. She was building structure, brick by brick. The first witness was Victor Salinas, the digital forensic analyst. Victor explained surveillance metadata carefully to the court, using enlarged diagrams displayed across monitors. The deletion sequence was not consistent with accidental hardware malfunction. He testified calmly. Garner crossed his arms. "So, systems fail only intentionally." No, Victor answered evenly. But this one did not fail naturally. Victor highlighted timestamp manipulations, synchronization irregularities, and manual access records tied to Franklin Storage's server. Then Naomi displayed the recovered car wash footage. The courtroom darkened slightly as the blurry video played across large monitors. Rain, streetlights, a dark SUV, a female figure carrying a red tote bag toward the warehouse entrance. No one spoke. Vanessa stared straight ahead without moving. Naomi paused the frame carefully. "Mr. Salinas," she asked, "is this footage authentic?" "Yes." "Was it shown to the original jury?" "No." "Why not?" Victor glanced briefly toward the prosecution table. "It was never recovered during the initial investigation." Naomi nodded slowly. Then came the metadata login. Username VHALE_accounting2. Vanessa finally shifted visibly in her seat. Just slightly. But Jared noticed. Garner objected repeatedly throughout the testimony, but the objections lacked force now. Less confidence, more irritation. The hearing paused briefly for lunch before Naomi called Logan Pierce. That changed the entire atmosphere. Logan entered through a side door, wearing a cheap gray suit that fit badly around the shoulders. He looked exhausted, pale, older than during the trial. Jared watched carefully as Logan took the oath. The man couldn't stop rubbing his hands together. Naomi approached slowly. "Mr. Pierce, did you testify during the original trial of Jared Myers?" "Yes. Did you tell the truth?" Long silence. Every sound inside the courtroom seemed to disappear. Then Logan answered quietly. "No." Movement spread instantly across the gallery. Reporters grabbed pens. Someone near the back whispered loudly. Judge Bennett banged his gavel once. Order. Naomi continued calmly. Why did you lie? Logan swallowed hard. Vanessa Hale asked me to. This time the courtroom exploded completely. Even Miles Garner looked shocked now. Vanessa's face lost color immediately. Jared remained motionless. Inside, though, something shifted heavily in his chest. Not satisfaction, release. Like pressure, finally cracking open after years underground. Naomi waited for silence again before continuing. Did Vanessa Hale offer you compensation? Yes. How much? Around $18,000 total. Why, Logan's voice trembled. She said Jared needed to look angry before investigators started asking financial questions. Naomi glanced briefly toward the judge, then back toward Logan. What financial questions? Insurance stuff. Debt. Henry Calloway. Garner stood suddenly. Objection. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Bennett replied. But damage already spread through the room. Naomi shifted direction immediately. Mr. Pierce, did you personally hear Jared Myers threaten Vanessa Hale? Number. Did you see Jared Myers enter Franklin's storage before the fire? Number. The courtroom fell silent again. Every piece of the original case was beginning to collapse publicly. Naomi approached the witness stand. One final step. Why are you telling the truth now? Logan looked down toward his shaking hands. Because Walter Griggs died. That answer carried more weight than tears would have. After Logan stepped down, Naomi called another witness. Elaine Porter from Fifth Third Bank. Middle-aged, professional, precise. She carried sealed financial records tied to Vanessa Hale. Garner objected immediately before testimony even began. Your Honor, relevance. Naomi interrupted sharply. The state argued motive extensively during the original trial. Financial evidence is directly relevant. Judge Bennett allowed the testimony. Elaine adjusted her glasses and opened a folder. Ms. Hale maintained a secondary account under her maiden name beginning 11 months before the fire. Naomi nodded. What activity occurred in that account? After the Franklin storage insurance payout, Elaine read directly from the records. Multiple structured deposits, totaling approximately $470,000. The room changed instantly. Even reporters stopped writing for a second. Jared slowly looked toward Vanessa. She no longer appeared controlled. Her jaw tightened visibly. And for the first time since the hearing began, she looked directly at him. Not with hatred, not with regret, with panic. Naomi approached Elaine carefully. Were these accounts disclosed during the original criminal investigation? Number, why not? We were never asked to search under the alternate name. Naomi let the silence settle. Then she turned slowly toward the bench. Your Honor, an innocent man has spent over 3 years incarcerated while critical financial evidence remained untouched. Miles Garner stood again, but this time he looked less like a prosecutor and more like a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. Judge Bennett removed his glasses slowly, then looked down toward the prosecution table. Counselor, he said carefully, Why was none of this presented during trial? Garner opened his mouth. But for the first time since Jared Myers had ever seen him, Miles Garner had no immediate answer. The courtroom stayed unnaturally quiet after Judge Bennett asked the question. Why was none of this presented during trial? Miles Garner stood frozen for half a second too long. That mattered. Jurors in criminal trials noticed hesitation instinctively. Judges did too. And now every person inside courtroom 4B watched the former prosecutor searching for an answer that sounded professional enough to survive public scrutiny. Garner cleared his throat. The state acted according to the evidence available at the time. Naomi Bennett didn't move. Judge Bennett leaned back slightly in his chair. You're telling this court that hidden financial accounts, manipulated surveillance metadata, and witness compensation never triggered further review? Garner adjusted his tie carefully. The defense is presenting conclusions, not established facts. Naomi finally spoke. No, Your Honor. We're presenting records. She walked calmly toward the evidence table and lifted another folder. There's more. Vanessa shifted instantly in her seat. Jared noticed that before anyone else. Fear moved through her differently now. Earlier she had looked nervous, controlled. Now she looked cornered. Naomi approached the bench. The defense requests permission to introduce supplemental banking audio tied to account activity under the name Vanessa Carter. Vanessa's maiden name. Garner objected immediately. Foundation. We have foundation, Naomi answered. Judge Bennett nodded once. Proceed. Elaine Porter returned briefly to authenticate the recording source. Once the chain of custody was established, Naomi connected a small speaker system near the evidence monitor. The audio quality sounded thin at first, static, typing. Then a woman's voice entered clearly, Vanessa. Jared recognized it instantly, even after 3 years. Controlled, smooth, slightly impatient when speaking to employees she considered beneath her. I just need confirmation the inactive account stays separate from the primary audit search. A bank representative answered cautiously. Ma'am, standard investigations can still access linked historical accounts under legal request. Short silence. Then Vanessa spoke again. No one checks inactive accounts unless they already know the name. The courtroom seemed to shrink around the sound of her voice. Jared watched Walter Griggs' daughter lower her head slowly into her hands. Naomi stopped the recording. No dramatic flourish, no raised voice. She didn't need one. Evidence carried its own weight. Judge Bennett looked toward Vanessa carefully. Ms. Hale, do you dispute the authenticity of this recording? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out immediately. Her attorney leaned toward her quickly, whispering something sharp beneath his breath. Finally, Vanessa answered quietly, no. That single word changed everything. Jared felt it happen physically inside the room. The original case had depended on one central belief. Vanessa Hale was trustworthy. Now that foundation was collapsing publicly piece by piece. Naomi continued without pause. The defense also requests the court review timeline inconsistencies involving the defendant's access card. Victor Salinas returned to the stand carrying enlarged server records. He explained how administrative access credentials linked to Vanessa's employee profile had interacted with the building security system shortly before the fire. Garner attempted another objection. Judge Bennett cut him off immediately. "Sit down, Mr. Garner." The courtroom grew even quieter after that. Because judges rarely used that tone unless patience was already gone. Victor highlighted several login sequences on the monitor. Whoever used these credentials had authority to alter user permissions temporarily. Naomi stepped closer. Could that include duplicating or remotely activating another employee's access card? Victor nodded. Yes. Jared lowered his eyes briefly toward the defense table. There it was, the answer to the question that haunted him for 3 years. How his card entered a building he never walked into. Naomi continued carefully. In your expert opinion, Mr. Salinas, is it technically possible the defendant's credentials were manipulated without his knowledge? Yes. Likely, yes. Why? Victor adjusted his glasses. Because the defendant's access records show no corresponding outbound movement. Afterward, real users usually enter and leave. This pattern resembles credential staging. Staging. The word echoed through the room. Jared looked toward Vanessa again. She stared straight ahead now, without blinking. But her right hand trembled against the armrest, very slightly. Enough. The hearing recessed briefly before afternoon arguments. Deputies escorted Jared into a holding room beneath the courthouse while attorneys regrouped upstairs. The room contained a metal bench, cinder block walls, and a small reinforced window facing an alley behind the building. Rain still fell outside. Jared sat silently while another inmate waited across the room in ankle restraints. The man eventually nodded toward him. You getting out? You getting out? Jared looked toward the rain. I don't know yet. But for the first time since sentencing, the answer no longer felt impossible. 20 minutes later, Naomi entered, carrying fresh paperwork. Her expression remained controlled, but Jared noticed the pace of her breathing, faster than normal. What happened? Naomi shut the door behind her, the states panicking. Jared stayed quiet. Miles Garner requested a private conference with the judge. About, he won't say. Naomi placed documents onto the bench beside Jared. But something else surfaced during recess. She slid over another financial report. Henry Calloway, Franklin's storage owner. Large debt settlements paid shortly after the insurance payout. Jared scanned the numbers carefully, then stopped at one transfer. Consulting payment. Eric Vance, the Dayton insurance consultant. Same man. Connected to Mid-State Risk Solutions. Naomi crossed her arms. The money chain's getting clearer. Henry knew. Yes. And Vanessa and Naomi looked directly at him. I think Vanessa coordinated operational details, while Henry handled the insurance side. Jared leaned back slowly against concrete. The structure finally made sense now. Not emotionally, mechanically. a planned financial burn operation disguised as domestic violence. Simple story covering complex fraud. Naomi sat beside him briefly. You were convenient. Jared nodded once. He already knew that. Working-class husband. Financial pressure. Quiet personality. Marital conflict. The system saw what it expected to see. And once enough people repeated the same story, evidence stopped being questioned. A deputy opened the holding room door moments later. Court's back. When Jared re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed completely. Reporters whispered constantly now. Even court staff looked tense. Vanessa no longer wore sunglasses. She looked pale beneath the fluorescent lighting. Judge Bennett returned to the bench carrying several pages of handwritten notes. He adjusted his glasses slowly before speaking. This court has reviewed significant newly discovered evidence challenging the integrity of the original conviction. No movement anywhere, not even from reporters. Judge Bennett continued. The prosecution's case depended heavily upon witness testimony and circumstantial interpretation, now shown to contain serious credibility concerns. Garner stared downward at his table. Naomi remained motionless. Jared felt his pulse slow instead of rise, like his body no longer trusted good news enough to react emotionally. Judge Bennett looked directly toward the prosecution. Mr. Garner, does the state intend to pursue retrial under current evidentiary circumstances? Garner stood carefully. For the first time since Jared had known his name, the prosecutor sounded uncertain. The state requests time for review. Judge Bennett nodded once. Granted. Then he looked toward Jared. However, the room froze again. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds the original conviction no longer legally reliable. Jared's fingers tightened once against the defense table. Just once. Judge Bennett lowered his voice slightly. The conviction of Jared Myers is hereby vacated pending final prosecutorial review. Shock moved through the room like electricity. Walter Griggs' daughter began crying quietly near the back. Reporters rushed toward exits. Vanessa closed her eyes. And Jared sat completely still while the words settled across 3 lost years of his life. Conviction vacated. Not guilty had not been spoken yet. Freedom had not arrived yet. But the concrete beneath the old case had finally cracked open. Then Naomi leaned slightly toward him and whispered the sentence Jared Myers had stopped believing he would ever hear. You're going home. Jared Myers did not walk free immediately. That surprised people. Movies trained people to expect dramatic endings. Prison gates opening at sunset. Emotional speeches. Tears. Music. Real freedom arrived through paperwork. Slowly. After Judge Bennett vacated the conviction, deputies escorted Jared back downstairs into the courthouse holding area while attorneys argued over procedural details above him. Temporary release authorization, state review timelines, custody transfer forms. Everything moved through signatures and stamps instead of emotion. Jared sat alone on the same steel bench for almost 2 hours, listening to courthouse plumbing rattle behind concrete walls. At some point, a young deputy entered carrying bottled water. You okay? Jared looked at him briefly. The deputy couldn't have been older than 25, too young to understand what 3 years inside did to a man. I'm fine, Jared answered. The deputy nodded awkwardly and left. Jared stared at the unopened water bottle for several minutes afterward. Fine. Strange word. 3 years earlier, he had owned a townhouse, a truck steady work, and a marriage he believed in. Now he owned prison-issued clothing and a cardboard box of personal effects waiting somewhere inside corrections. Storage. And wasn't the right word. But neither was broken, because broken things stopped functioning. And Jared had survived. Near 5 p.m., Naomi Bennett finally returned downstairs carrying another stack of papers beneath one arm. We're done. Jared stood immediately, meaning you're being released pending formal dismissal review. Pending. Everything still came with conditions. But Naomi's expression told him enough. This part was real. A corrections supervisor arrived moments later with release forms requiring signatures. Jared signed, carefully using a cheap black pen attached to a clipboard by plastic wire. Name, date, inmate number. Each signature peeled away another layer of prison identity. The supervisor eventually looked up from the paperwork. You'll receive transportation reimbursement by mail once processing clears. Jared nodded once. The man hesitated awkwardly before speaking again. For what it's worth, looks like they got this one wrong. Jared said nothing. Not because he wanted revenge, because apologies after stolen years sounded small. The supervisor uncuffed him one final time. Metal clicked softly against concrete. Then it was over. No speech, no announcement, just absence. The absence of restraints after 1,094 days. Naomi waited beside the hallway exit while Jared changed into civilian clothes returned from storage. Jeans slightly loose now, old brown belt, faded boots, and the same dark jacket he wore the night Franklin's storage burned down. Jared stared at the jacket for a long moment before putting it on. Smoke, rain, police lights, Vanessa crying beneath emergency blankets. The memory still lived inside the fabric somehow. When he finally stepped outside the courthouse, through the restricted side entrance, cold October air hit his face immediately. Jared stopped walking. Not dramatically. Just stopped. Traffic moved across downtown Columbus, while rainwater reflected brake lights along the street. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed between buildings. Ordinary sounds. But after prison, ordinary sounds felt unnaturally sharp. Naomi stood quietly beside him, holding an umbrella neither of them used. You okay? She asked softly. The same question as the deputy. Different meaning. Jared looked upward toward the gray sky. No, he answered honestly. Naomi nodded once, like she respected the answer. Reporters still crowded the courthouse front entrance, waiting for statements, but Naomi had arranged their exit carefully to avoid cameras. You hungry? She asked. Jared thought about the prison cafeteria suddenly. Plastic trays, powdered eggs, overcooked vegetables, institutional coffee tasting faintly of burned metal. Yes. 20 minutes later, they sat inside a nearly empty diner near German Village. Nothing expensive. Red booths, chrome napkin holders. College football playing silently above the counter television. Jared ordered bacon, eggs, toast, and black coffee, then barely touched any of it. Freedom felt stranger than prison at first. In prison, every hour belonged to structure. Outside choices returned all at once. Naomi watched him carefully across the booth. You don't have to talk. I know. You also don't have to pretend you're fine. Jared wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Steam drifted upward between them. What happens now? Naomi leaned back slightly. The state reviews whether to dismiss fully or attempt retrial. They won't retry. No, the answer came immediately. Too much damage existed now, too much public exposure. Wrongful convictions embarrassed entire systems. Retrying weak cases made it worse. Jared stared through the diner window toward passing headlights. What about Vanessa? Naomi's expression changed slightly. Different problem. How bad she's under active investigation now? Jared said nothing. Naomi continued carefully. Financial crimes, perjury, evidence tampering, potential conspiracy, and Walter Grigg's silence. That part remained heavier, because insurance fraud sounded clinical. Walter dying inside the collapsing warehouse did not. Naomi lowered her voice slightly. If prosecutors can prove Vanessa knowingly created the conditions leading to his death, homicide charges become possible. Jared looked back down at the untouched food. For 3 years, he imagined revenge differently sometimes. Not violence, just confrontation. Vanessa finally admitting the truth. Begging, breaking. But now, sitting free inside a diner while rain slid across Columbus streets, outside Jared realized something strange. He didn't want emotional satisfaction anymore. He wanted accuracy, the truth documented completely. Nothing hidden, nothing dramatized, because lies had already taken enough. Naomi interrupted his thoughts quietly. There's something else. Jared looked up. Henry Calloway disappeared this morning. That got his attention instantly. Disappeared. Phone disconnected. House empty. Jared leaned back slowly. He's running. Probably. Can they find him? Naomi stirred her coffee once before answering. Depends how much help he had. The statement lingered between them. Help. Jared thought again about Miles Garner, ignoring financial evidence during the original case. Logan Pierce, mentioning another man in expensive suits. Insurance consultants. Hidden accounts. The deeper the truth became, the less isolated the conspiracy looked. Naomi eventually slid a folded document across the table. What's this, your release authorization? Jared unfolded it slowly. State of Ohio, order of conditional release. Simple paper. 3 years reduced to paragraphs. He stared at it for a long moment. Then Naomi spoke again. There's a follow-up hearing tomorrow morning. About what formal dismissal procedures? Jared nodded once. Naomi hesitated before continuing. Vanessa will probably be there. The diner seemed quieter suddenly. Jared took another sip of Covivi. No reaction. But Naomi noticed his grip tighten slightly around the mug. You don't have to look at her. Yes, Jared answered calmly. I do. Later that night, Naomi arranged a motel room outside downtown for him because there was nowhere else to go. The townhouse was gone. The marriage gone. Most former friends disappeared years earlier. Jared entered the motel room carrying a paper bag of spare clothes Naomi bought from Target on the way there. The room smelled faintly like bleach and old carpet. He sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the television. Silence filled the room completely. No prison doors. No count calls. No yelling down concrete hallways. Freedom sounded empty at first. Jared removed the release paperwork from his jacket pocket again and stared at it beneath dim bedside lighting. Then his eyes drifted toward the motel window. Rain had finally stopped. Downtown Columbus lights glowed faintly in the distance. Tomorrow he would walk back into the same courthouse where Vanessa Hale once watched him get sentenced. Only now, the story inside that courtroom had changed. And for the first time in 3 years, Vanessa no longer controlled it. Jared Myers woke before sunrise in the motel room. For a few seconds, he forgot where he was. Then the silence reminded him. No steel doors, no prison count, no corrections officer yelling through concrete hallways. Just the low hum of traffic outside and pale morning light leaking through cheap curtains. He sat up slowly, on the edge of the bed, and rubbed both hands across his face. 3 years inside prison trained his body to wake early whether he wanted to or not. The motel coffee tasted terrible. Still better than prison coffee. At 7:15 a.m., Naomi Bennett knocked once on the door. Jared opened it, wearing the clean white button-up shirt she bought him the night before. It fit better than the donated courtroom clothes from his original trial, but his shoulders still looked heavier now. Prison weight, not physical. Something deeper. Naomi studied him briefly. You ready? No. She nodded once. Good answer. Rain had stopped overnight, leaving downtown Columbus washed gray beneath cold autumn skies. Reporters already crowded the courthouse steps again by the time Naomi parked in the underground garage reserved for attorneys. This time, though, everything felt reversed. 3 years earlier, Jared entered this building chained and condemned before proceedings even started. Today, people moved aside when Naomi Bennett walked past. Because now, cameras wanted the stories she uncovered, not the one prosecutors invented. A courthouse employee guided them toward a private elevator to avoid the press upstairs. As the elevator doors closed, Naomi glanced toward Jared. State prosecutors filed emergency motions at 2 a.m. What kind? Protective language. Damage control, mostly. Jared stared at the floor indicator lights. They know it's over. Yes. The elevator opened onto the third-floor hallway, outside courtroom 4B. Voices echoed everywhere. Court officers, journalists, attorneys whispering urgently beside windows. The moment Jared stepped into the hallway, conversations softened noticeably. Some people recognized him instantly. Others recognized the story. The quiet HVAC technician who supposedly murdered a security guard, now walking free while the case against his ex-wife collapsed publicly. Jared ignored all of it. Then he saw Vanessa. She stood near the far courtroom doors, beside 2 attorneys wearing a dark charcoal coat and black gloves, despite the mild temperature inside. For a moment, nobody moved. Vanessa looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically. The confidence was gone. 3 years earlier, she controlled every room she entered because she believed nobody could challenge the version of reality she created. Now her eyes moved constantly, watching exits, watching cameras, watching people whisper. Fear changed posture more than age ever could. Vanessa noticed Jared at the exact same moment. Her body stiffened immediately. Jared kept walking toward the courtroom without changing pace. No anger, no dramatic confrontation. That unsettled her more, because she clearly expected rage or hatred or some visible emotional wound she could understand. Instead, Jared simply looked at her the way a man looked at a collapsed building after the fire was already out. Cold, measured, finished. Inside courtroom 4B. The atmosphere felt heavier than the day before. This hearing was no longer about reviewing evidence. Now it was about consequences. Judge Bennett entered promptly at 9 a.m. Everyone stood. The state prosecutor handling the hearing today was not Miles Garner. That mattered immediately. Garner sat farther back behind another attorney, looking pale beneath courtroom lighting. Jared noticed Naomi watching him carefully. Interesting. Very interesting. The hearing began with formal statements from the state. Assistant Prosecutor Lydia Mercer stood first. After review of newly submitted evidence and witness recantation, the state of Ohio moves to dismiss all charges against Jared Myers with prejudice. The words landed heavily through the courtroom. Dismissed with prejudice, meaning the state could never retry him. Ever. Judge Bennett looked toward Jared. Mr. Myers, you are formally cleared of all criminal liability connected to the Franklin storage fire. Jared lowered his eyes briefly, not emotional, just absorbing it. 3 years, gone with one sentence. No speech could balance that equation. Judge Bennett continued. This court additionally refers evidence presented during post-conviction review to the Franklin County Special Investigations Unit. Movement spread instantly through the room. Vanessa's attorneys leaned toward her quickly. Naomi remained perfectly still. Then the courtroom side door opened. 2 investigators from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation entered quietly, carrying folders. Vanessa saw them immediately, and panic finally became visible. Real panic, not controlled fear anymore. Her breathing changed, hands tightening against the defense table. One investigator handed paperwork directly to Assistant Prosecutor Mercer. Mercer reviewed the documents briefly before speaking. Your Honor, the state requests permission to address newly filed criminal complaints. Granted. Mercer stood and faced the courtroom. Vanessa Hale is hereby charged with aggravated arson, insurance fraud, tampering with evidence, perjury, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and involuntary manslaughter connected to the death of Walter Griggs. The room exploded. Reporters rushed for phones. Someone gasped loudly near the back. Walter Griggs' daughter began crying openly. Vanessa shook her head immediately. No. The word came out weak. Mercer continued anyway. Additional warrants connected to financial misconduct and witness bribery are also pending. Vanessa turned sharply toward her attorneys. You said they didn't have enough. One attorney whispered urgently for her to stop talking. Too late. Jared watched everything without expression. Not because he felt nothing, because prison had taught him something important. Real consequences arrive quietly, without speeches, without satisfaction, just reality finally catching up. Judge Bennett restored order after several seconds of chaos. Then he looked toward Jared directly. Mr. Myers, before we conclude, the court is prepared to offer an opportunity for statement should you wish to make one. The courtroom became silent. Again, instantly. Every camera turned toward him. Naomi leaned closer slightly. You don't have to. Jared stood slowly. 3 years earlier, he stood in the same room while strangers described him as violent, unstable, dangerous. Now every person waited to hear what an innocent man would say after losing 1,094 days of his life. Jared looked first toward Walter Griggs' family, then finally toward Vanessa. She could barely meet his eyes now. When Jared spoke, his voice remained calm. I spent 3 years trying to understand why this happened. No dramatic pauses, no shaking anger. I kept thinking about the fire, about the trial, about what people believed when they looked at me. The courtroom stayed completely still. Jared continued. Walter Griggs never came home that night. His family lost more than I did. Walter's daughter lowered her head again, crying quietly. Jared looked briefly toward the prosecution table. Evidence matters. Facts matter. And when people stop checking facts because a story feels easier, innocent people disappear. No one interrupted, because everyone inside that courtroom understood the sentence reached beyond him now. Then Jared turned fully toward Vanessa for the first time since the hearing began. She looked terrified, but Jared's expression never changed. I don't hate you, he said quietly. That surprised her visibly. You already destroyed your own life. Silence. Heavy and absolute. Jared sat back down. No applause followed. No dramatic courtroom outburst. Just truth settling slowly across the room like dust after collapse. Then one of the BCI investigators approached Vanessa carefully. Ms. Hale, please stand. Her attorneys started speaking rapidly, at once, but the investigator continued calmly. You are under arrest. Vanessa stood slowly on shaking legs. And as handcuffs closed around her wrists, Jared Myers finally looked away. Vanessa Hale's trial began 4 months later. By then, Columbus had completely reversed its opinion about Jared Myers. People who once crossed the street to avoid him now nodded respectfully when he entered coffee shops. Local reporters called him the wrongfully convicted HVAC technician. Podcasts discussed failures inside the original investigation. News stations replayed clips from the evidentiary hearing almost weekly. Jared ignored most of it. Public opinion changed too easily to trust. 1 year, they called him a murderer. The next, they called him a survivor. Neither version knew him. Winter settled heavily over Ohio by the time jury selection began in Vanessa's case. Snow gathered along courthouse steps, while camera crews waited outside beneath heavy coats and portable heaters. Unlike Jared's trial, this courtroom felt tense from the beginning, not emotional, dangerous, because now prosecutors understood the public was watching closely. Mistakes would not survive scrutiny twice. Assistant Prosecutor Lydia Mercer led the case personally. Calm voice, ruthless preparation, very different from Miles Garner's dramatic courtroom style. Mercer relied on documents, timelines, financial trails, facts, exactly what Naomi Bennett respected most. Jared entered through a side hallway on the third day of testimony, after being called as a witness for the prosecution. The courthouse deputy guiding him paused outside the courtroom doors. Nervous, Jared adjusted the cuff of his gray coat slightly. No. That surprised even him. 3 years earlier, this building had nearly buried him alive. Now fear no longer lived here, only memory. Inside courtroom 4, Vanessa sat beside her defense attorneys, wearing a navy blouse and minimal makeup. Jail processing had removed the expensive polish she once used like armor. No designer coats now. No carefully staged tears for television cameras. Just exhaustion. When Jared entered, she looked up automatically, then immediately looked away. The jury noticed. Juries noticed everything. Mercer approached Jared Kimley after he took the oath. Mr. Myers, how long were you incarcerated for crimes connected to the Franklin storage fire? 3 years. Did you commit those crimes? Numb. Mercer nodded once. No theatrics. She moved carefully through timelines next. Jared explained his marriage, the arguments, the missing access card, and the night of the fire in precise detail. Not once did he exaggerate. That mattered, because truthful people rarely needed embellishment. Vanessa's defense attorney eventually stood for cross-examination. Tall man, expensive suit, smooth voice. Mr. Myers, you understandably resent my client? Correct. Jared looked directly at him. I don't need to resent her for facts to exist. A few jurors shifted slightly. The attorney continued. You were angry during your marriage. We argued. You threatened divorce. No, you monitored Vanessa's behavior. I noticed changes, but you suspected infidelity. Jared paused briefly. Yes. The defense attorney stepped closer. So, jealousy existed. Suspicion existed. Small difference. Important difference. The attorney changed tactics. Isn't it true prison gave you strong motivation to blame someone else? Jared answered immediately. Evidence blamed her. Not emotion. Not revenge. Evidence. Mercer watched quietly from the prosecution table, while the defense attorney struggled to provoke visible anger from Jared. Nothing worked, because prison had already burned impulsive reactions out of him years earlier. After cross-examination ended, Jared stepped down from the witness stand and moved toward the gallery seating reserved for witnesses. Walter Griggs' daughter sat near the aisle. Before Jared passed fully, she touched his sleeve gently. Thank you, she whispered. Jared stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she handed him a folded photograph. Walter, standing beside an old fishing boat, smiling beneath summer sunlight. My dad fixed air conditioners too before security work, she said softly. Jared stared at the picture carefully. Something tightened quietly inside his chest. Not guilt. Something heavier. Connection. Walter Griggs should have retired peacefully years earlier. Instead, he died inside a burning warehouse built around greed. Later that afternoon, prosecutors introduced the strongest financial evidence yet. Bank transfers, insurance payouts, structured deposits hidden beneath Vanessa's maiden name. Then came Henry Callaway. Federal marshals finally located him in Arizona after months hiding under cash motel registrations and false employment records. Now he sat on the witness stand, sweating visibly beneath courtroom lights. Mercer approached slowly. "Mr. Callaway, did you participate in insurance fraud connected to Franklin's storage?" "Yes." The answer landed heavily. Vanessa closed her eyes immediately. Mercer continued. "Who planned the operational details of the fire?" Henry swallowed hard. "Vanessa, explain." "She handled timing, security access, employee schedules." Mercer walked closer. "What was Jared Myers' role?" Henry looked toward the floor. Nothing. No dramatic denial. Just truth. Simple and ugly. Henry explained how Vanessa suggested framing Jared early in planning discussions because his personality fit the narrative prosecutors would believe. "Quiet guy, blue collar, marriage problems," Henry muttered. She said people would assume the rest. Jared sat motionless, listening. Every sentence confirmed something he learned painfully inside prison. Systems often preferred believable stories over complicated truths. Mercer asked the final question carefully. Did Vanessa Hale know Walter Griggs might be inside during the fire? Long silence followed. Henry rubbed both hands together nervously. Yes. The courtroom became perfectly still. Mercer lowered her voice, and she proceeded anyway. Yes. Vanessa suddenly spoke from the defense table. That's not true. The interruption shocked everyone. Her attorneys immediately tried calming her down, but panic had already broken through. Henry looked toward her weakly. You said he'd leave early. Vanessa shook her head rapidly. No, that's not. You said security. Rotation changed. Judge Bennett banged the gavel sharply. Order. But the damage was done. Jurors watched Vanessa carefully now. Not as a victim, not even as a manipulator anymore. As someone losing control. The prosecution rested 2 days later. Vanessa chose not to testify, smart legally, rebel visually, because the jury spent weeks hearing documents, recordings, financial trails, witness testimony, and forensic evidence without hearing meaningful denial directly from her. Closing arguments began Friday morning during heavy snowfall. Mercer stood before the jury, holding no notes. Walter Griggs died because greed required a believable villain, she said calmly. Then she gestured toward Jared, seated quietly near the gallery. The defendant chose Jared Myers because she believed silence looked dangerous. She believed working-class frustration looked violent. She believed calm men would not fight back once buried beneath accusation. Every juror watched her carefully. Mercer continued, but evidence remembers what lies forget. No shouting, no drama, just precision. Vanessa's defense attempted reasonable doubt arguments afterward, but the case already felt finished. Too many pieces aligned now, too many financial records, too many lies collapsing under documentation. The jury began deliberations shortly after noon. Jared waited outside the courtroom near a hallway window, watching snow fall across downtown Columbus. Naomi stood nearby reviewing messages on her phone. "You think it's quick?" Jared asked. "Yes." How quick? Naomi finally looked up. "Less than 4 hours." She was almost right. At 3:41 p.m., the courtroom deputy announced the jury had reached verdicts. People moved quickly back inside. Vanessa sat rigid beside her attorneys, while reporters packed every available seat behind the railings. Jared remained standing near the rear wall beside Naomi. The jury foreperson rose slowly after receiving the verdict forms. "On the charge of aggravated arson," pause, "we find the defendant guilty." Vanessa closed her eyes. "On the charge of involuntary manslaughter," another pause, "guilty." The remaining verdicts followed quickly afterward. Insurance fraud, perjury, hampering with evidence, conspiracy. All guilty. No outburst came from Vanessa this time. No tears either. Just emptiness. As deputies moved toward her, Jared looked down at the photograph Walter Griggs' daughter had given him earlier that week. Walter smiling beside the fishing boat. A normal life. Destroyed because someone believed lies were easier than truth. Then Judge Bennett thanked the jury quietly and scheduled formal sentencing. People began leaving slowly, but Jared stayed where he was for another moment, watching deputies place handcuffs around Vanessa Hale's wrists, exactly where his own life had started collapsing 3 years earlier. Only this time, the right person was wearing them. Vanessa Hale received 22 years in state prison. Henry Calloway received 14, after cooperating with investigators. Miles Garner resigned from the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office 3 weeks before internal disciplinary hearings began. Officially, the resignation cited professional exhaustion. Nobody believed that. Columbus moved on quickly after the trials ended. Cities always did. New headlines replaced old ones. New scandals buried older disasters beneath fresh noise. Within months, most people stopped discussing the Franklin storage fire entirely. But Jared Myers still woke up some nights, hearing prison doors slam shut in his head. Freedom did not erase memory. It only gave memory more room to breathe. The state of Ohio eventually approved financial compensation for wrongful conviction after Naomi Bennett spent nearly a year forcing paperwork through hearings reviews and administrative resistance. The amount sounded large on television. To Jared, it felt mathematical. Money replacing stolen time. Impossible equation. He used part of it to buy a modest single-story house in Hilliard west of Columbus. Nothing flashy. 2 bedrooms. Small garage. Quiet street lined with maple trees. The first night there, Jared sat alone on the living room floor because he had not bought furniture yet. Silence filled the house completely. No yelling, no metal doors, no television reporters asking for statements. Just rain tapping lightly against windows. He stayed there for almost an hour before realizing something strange. For the first time in years, nobody expected anything from him. Not survival, not defense, not explanation. The realization felt heavier than relief. Jared returned to HVAC work 6 months later. Not because he needed money, because he needed structure. Machines still made sense. People still mostly didn't. He opened a small company called Walker Honest Air out of a renovated warehouse near Dublin Road. Naomi laughed at the name the first time she saw it painted across the side of the service vans. "That's subtle," she said. Jared shrugged slightly. "People should know what they're paying for." The company started small. 3 vans, 4 employees, then 8. Jared hired carefully. Quiet workers. People others overlooked too quickly. One employee named Marcus carried a felony drug conviction from his early 20s and had spent years unable to find stable work afterward. Another technician named Luis lived in his truck before Jared hired him full-time. Naomi noticed the pattern one evening while helping organize tax paperwork inside the office. "You keep hiring people nobody else wants." Jared looked up from a stack of invoices. "Somebody hired me once." Naomi studied him silently for a second, then nodded once. By the second year, Walker Honest Air serviced commercial buildings across central Ohio. Jared became known for straightforward pricing and actually returning emergency calls after midnight. Simple things, rare things. One snowy December afternoon, Jared received an envelope forwarded through the office. No return address. Inside sat a single photograph. Leon Brooks, standing outside North Central Correctional Complex, wearing civilian clothes and holding a bus ticket. Released. Jared stared at the photo for a long moment before smiling faintly, for what might have been the first genuine time in years. He called the number written on the back immediately. Leon answered on the second ring. "Took you long enough." Jared laughed quietly. Real laughter this time. Not forced. "Where are you, Cleveland, for now?" "You got somewhere to stay?" "Working on it." 3 days later, Jared hired him as a logistics coordinator for Walker Honest Air. Naomi pretended to object. "You're building a company entirely out of ex-cons." Jared looked toward Leon unloading inventory boxes from a delivery truck. People deserve another chance when the system gets it wrong. Naomi didn't argue after that. Despite everything improving externally, some wounds remained invisible. Crowded rooms still made Jared uncomfortable sometimes. Sudden loud noises occasionally froze him in place before logic caught up. He still folded clothing with prison precision without realizing it. And every October 27th, he drove alone to Green Lawn Cemetery carrying fresh flowers. Walter Griggs' grave sat beneath a large oak tree near the western fence line. Simple headstone, marine emblem, beloved father and grandfather. Jared never stayed long, usually 10 minutes, sometimes less. One year, Walter's daughter arrived while Jared stood there quietly, holding coffee from a nearby gas station. She smiled sadly when she saw him. "You always come early." Jared glanced toward the headstone. "I don't like crowds." She nodded like she understood perfectly. For a while, neither spoke. Then she handed him an envelope. "What's this?" "My father's old, HVAC certifications. Jared frowned slightly. Why he would have liked what you built. Jared looked down at the worn papers carefully. Walter's old technician license from 1989, service records, training certificates. An ordinary working man's life, reduced to documents, just like prison had almost reduced Jared's. Walter's daughter spoke softly beside him. You know what bothered my dad most? Jared looked up. People who lied professionally. The sentence lingered in cold autumn air between them. Jared folded the papers carefully. I understand that now. Before leaving, he placed a Walker Honest Air Service card near the flowers. The back contained handwritten words, lifetime service for the Griggs family. No charge, ever. 3 years after his release, Jared finally sold the old white HVAC van connected to so many memories. The transmission barely worked anymore. Rust spread across the wheel wells. The driver's seat still carried a tear near the stitching from years of heavy use. A teenage mechanic bought it for almost nothing. You sure this thing still runs? The kid asked. Jared looked at the van quietly. Yeah, he answered. It survives. That night, Jared drove home in a newer service truck beneath fading sunset light along Interstate 270. The radio played softly. Traffic moved steadily around him. Normal life. At a red light near Hilliard Rome Road, Jared glanced at his reflection in the windshield. Older now, harder around the eyes, but alive. The quiet man everyone once believed was dangerous had survived prison betrayal, public hatred, and a broken justice system without becoming cruel himself. That mattered, because bitterness would have been easier. As the light turned green, Jared drove west toward home while evening sunlight broke through clouds across the Ohio sky. And for the first time in many years, he no longer felt like he was being chased by the past. Some people mistake silence for weakness. They think calm men are easy to bury because they don't scream, don't perform, and don't fight for attention. Jared Myers lost 3 years because the world trusted a believable story more than uncomfortable facts. But truth has a strange habit. It waits, quietly, patiently. And when real evidence finally appears, lies begin collapsing under their own weight. A lot of people watching this have probably experienced some version of that feeling. Maybe not prison, maybe not a courtroom, but being misunderstood, being blamed too quickly, watching louder people control the narrative while you sit there knowing the truth sounds smaller than the accusation. The important thing is what happens next. Jared survived because he stayed patient long enough to let facts speak louder than emotion. He didn't win by destroying himself with rage. He won because he remembered details, stayed disciplined, and refused to let bitterness become his entire identity. If you've ever been falsely judged, betrayed, or forced to stay quiet while people assumed the worst about you, leave a comment below. I read more of them than you think. And subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this tomorrow, because the next one begins with a man finding a locked suitcase buried under his brother's house. 6 years after a disappearance no one could explain.